The Map of the Afterlife according to Edgar Cayce. Where does the soul go after death? He wore no robes. He carried no religious title. He had no formal theological education. And yet, when Edgar Cayce closed his eyes and slipped into a peculiar sleep, something extraordinary would begin. In that fragile trance between waking and dreaming, Cayce spoke, but it wasn't like a man mumbling in slumber. His tone shifted, his voice deepened. He spoke as if transmitting from a place far beyond this world, a place untouched by time. Doctors were present. They listened carefully. Many doubted. Of course, how could they not? But despite their skepticism, one thing became impossible to deny: the astonishing accuracy of his words. He diagnosed illnesses in strangers, sometimes people he had never met. He offered treatments, natural remedies, practices, insights that decades later would be confirmed by science. But what left the greatest impression on those who heard him wasn't just the medical insight. It was his revelations about the soul, and what truly awaits us after we take our last breath. These weren't folktales or spiritual poetry. According to Cayce, life after death was real. It was structured, it had stages, dimensions, and most importantly, it offered each soul a choice. He didn't describe heaven and hell as fixed destinations. To him, the afterlife wasn't a place you were sent. It was a path you walked, not up or down, but inward, like a flower unfolding from the center out. When the soul leaves the body, Cayce said, it doesn't vanish, it transitions. It moves into a subtler, lighter dimension, and the very first sensation it feels? Relief. Like a heavy coat falling from your shoulders. The burden of the physical body, the aches, the aging, the weight of it all, gone. Because the body was never who you were. It was only a vessel, a tool, borrowed for a time. But freedom doesn't mean finality. According to Cayce, death is not the end. It is a doorway, and beyond that threshold, the soul journeys through planetary spheres. Not in the literal sense. He wasn't talking about flying past Saturn or hopping over Jupiter. These planets were not locations in space. They were spiritual states, energetic realms that reflected the soul's inner development. Each sphere, he explained, matched certain spiritual qualities, and as the soul moved through them, it faced trials, not external ones, but internal reflections. You see, in this space, there are no lies, no performances, no masks, only truth. The reality around you is a mirror of what lived inside you all along. According to Cayce, the soul first encounters the astral plane, the lowest of the spiritual realms. A shadowy place, a realm of desires, of attachments. Those still clinging to the material world, to fear, possessions, status, remain here. It isn't hell, in the fire and brimstone sense. But it is a place of stagnation, where the soul stays stuck, until it lets go, forgives, understands. If the soul holds enough light, if it's ready, then it ascends. It begins passing through higher vibrational spheres, symbolized by planets, Venus, Jupiter, Saturn. But again, these are not places in the sky. They are inner realities. Venus, the realm of love, welcomes those who lived for others. Jupiter, the sphere of wisdom and learning, is where souls who taught, guided, and sought truth may go. Saturn, the sphere of karma, confronts the soul with what was left unresolved, unhealed, or misunderstood, and only then does the soul reach a profound moment, a choice. Whether to continue forward, or to return. Because, Cayce insisted, reincarnation is not an obligation. It's not a punishment. It's a choice. A soul only agrees to come back if it feels there is still something to learn. Something to complete. It's not about debt. It's about growth. It's not justice. It's love. A second chance. A new chapter. There is no eternal hell, he said, only the state of the soul itself. And if a person lived with hate after death, they remain surrounded by hatred, not because someone puts them there, but because that is what they have become. They carry their own world within them. At the time, these ideas were radical, even scandalous. Religious institutions stayed silent, scholars scoffed. But then, something began to shift. People who had lost loved ones, those desperate for comfort and understanding, began to seek answers. And many of them found hope, not in scripture, but in Cayce's transcripts. In the words of a man who didn't preach, but remembered. A man who spoke from deep within the silence. And in all his stories, in all his records, one truth echoed again and again. You are not alone. And death is not destruction. It is return. So what does the soul actually see when it leaves the body? According to Cayce, it doesn't disappear. It doesn't float aimlessly. It returns. But not backwards, inward. Because this journey is not through space, but through consciousness. And Cayce didn't describe this as mysticism. For him, it was entirely logical. The soul is energy. It may not have a physical form. But it carries memory. It carries experience. It carries intention. And these are what determine where it travels next. Some of the most extraordinary details Cayce ever shared were his descriptions of these so-called planetary levels of experience, the architecture of the afterlife. But to truly understand how those levels work, and what they reveal about your own inner light, let's move forward. To the modern mind, all of this might sound abstract, a kind of spiritual poetry, maybe too mystical for a world grounded in facts. But if we take a closer look, Edgar Cayce wasn't speaking in riddles. He wasn't describing astrology or science fiction. What he offered was symbolism, a powerful language of the soul. Each planetary name he mentioned, Mercury, Venus, Mars, was not about space or stars. It was about states of consciousness. Realms within us that awaken after death. Mercury, the realm of thought and intellect. Here dwell souls who pursued knowledge in life, but not always truth. They were seekers of ideas, of facts, but sometimes forgot the wisdom of the heart. Venus, the realm of love and devotion. This sphere welcomes those who loved selflessly, who forgave deeply, who chose compassion even when it cost them something. Mars, the realm of inner battle. It holds the souls still clinging to unresolved struggles. Those who passed on while still wrestling with anger, conflict, or personal war. Jupiter, the realm of wisdom. Souls here are the teachers, the guides, those who helped others, or grew spiritually through painful but honest truths. Saturn, the realm of lessons. It is here that the soul comes face to face with what it still must learn, wounds left open, choices left unexplored. But none of this, Cayce insisted, is punishment. It's a mirror, one that reflects the soul's true state, not to shame it, but to help it grow. Beyond these spheres lie even higher levels, Uranus and Neptune, which Cayce described as realms of the higher self. Here, the soul begins to grasp not only who it is, but what it is part of. It starts to see the divine design, the interconnectedness of all things. And then comes Pluto, the threshold, the point of transition. At this level, a decision must be made: return or continue forward. Again, this is not a map of the sky. It is the map of the soul. The planets are not external orbits, they are internal dimensions. Reflections of who we are, not where we go. Among all the concepts Edgar Cayce explored, perhaps the most well-known and most powerful was the Akashic Records. He described it not as a physical library in the clouds, but as a spiritual archive, a sacred record of every soul's journey. According to Cayce, every thought, every action, every word leaves a mark. Not for judgment, but for growth. The soul doesn't return to earth empty-handed. It brings with it a bundle of memory, experience, and deep spiritual data. It is within the Akashic Records that the soul reads its own story. There, it finds its direction. It understands what must be healed, who it must meet again, and what unfinished lesson calls it back. In this way, Cayce said, karma is not punishment. It's not a chain. It's a compass. Every soul comes into life with a mission, and every soul leaves with a lesson. And then comes the moment of choice. Not all souls rush to reincarnate. Some linger, resting in the light, reflecting. Some return quickly, sent on a mission. And others remain trapped in shadows of pain, of doubt, of fear. Between death and rebirth, Cayce said, time becomes meaningless. What may be weeks or hundreds of years to us feels like nothing in that dimension. Because there is no time, only readiness. And when the soul is ready, it chooses again. It re-enters a body, a life. But this time, not by chance. The soul selects its family, its place of birth, even the challenges it will face. Because wrapped within each struggle lies a spiritual opportunity. What we often call fate, Cayce insisted, is actually choice. A choice made long before birth. There are no accidental lives. He said, there are only souls who have forgotten why they came. To some, his words sounded like something from another dimension. But to those who had suffered loss, they carried hope, not because they promised a paradise beyond death, but because they revealed something even deeper. Death is not the end. It is a passage, the beginning of something greater. But that passage isn't always easy to understand. One of the most striking revelations in Cayce's work is this: many souls do not realize they have died. In the moments following death, Cayce said, the soul may still see itself. It hears thoughts. It senses the presence of others. But it has no body. And at first, it doesn't notice. It's not frightening, just strange, unfamiliar. Some souls try to speak to loved ones. They try to touch, to show that they're still here. But no one answers. No one responds. And slowly, the truth begins to settle in. I'm on the other side. Cayce described this as a kind of sleep after death. A quiet slumber, not like dreaming. Not like unconsciousness, but a deep resting state. No body, no movement, yet full memory of earthly life. It is not heaven. It is not hell. It is what he called a transition room, a sacred pause between what was and what comes next. In this space, the soul watches its former life from a distance. It sees loved ones grieving. It sees its own body still. And with that, a new awareness begins to unfold. Everything has changed. For souls that were spiritually mature, this state may last only briefly, a gentle bridge, but for those who lived with fear, or anger, or disbelief, it may last years, even decades, because the soul cannot move forward until it fully accepts one simple truth. It has died, and it must forgive, both others, and itself. Only after the soul accepts its passing, only once it begins to let go, is it gently guided onward. Edgar Cayce spoke of guides, but not in the traditional religious sense. These weren't winged angels in robes. They were other souls, souls who had once walked the path, who had known us in life. A grandmother, a friend, a kind stranger whose impact we barely noticed. And they are the first presences we feel after death. According to Cayce, we don't walk into darkness alone. We are met, and we are led. The soul doesn't stumble blindly. It's welcomed, often by a familiar presence that we somehow recognize not by sight, but by feeling. These were, as Cayce described, some of the most moving and sacred moments. The soul may literally feel the touch of someone already there, not physical, but unmistakably real. It's like a hand on your heart, not your skin, like warmth in the cold, like light breaking through fog. It is peace, not the kind you read about, but the kind that wraps around you like a long-lost memory. And then, begins the reflection. Cayce said that after death, the soul begins to review its life. Not like watching a movie, but by feeling what others felt. It is not about punishment. It is not about reward. It's about awareness. If, in life, you caused someone pain, then after death, you experience that pain, not through guilt, but through empathy. You feel what they felt. The hurt, the confusion, the silence. Their tears become your own, not to punish you, but so you understand the true weight of your actions. But this reflection also includes the good. Every kind word, every gentle gesture, every silent prayer becomes a light, not a metaphorical glow, but a reality. The very substance of the soul's environment. You are now surrounded by what you gave. And that light? It's not tallied like points. It becomes the space you live in. The greatest judgment, Cayce said, is not handed down by another. It is the truth the soul sees for itself. Heaven and hell? According to him, they are not destinations. They are states of consciousness. And no one assigns you there. You are drawn to the level that matches your vibration, the energy of your soul. Those who lived with fear, with bitterness or hatred, they remain in lower planes. Not burning in fire, but suspended in cold silence. In the loneliness they carried within. Not as punishment, but as reflection. And those who lived with faith, kindness, and humility rise into realms where love is not just a feeling, it becomes the very atmosphere. It might sound simple, but it holds profound truth. Because what Cayce described wasn't a landscape after death, it was the continuation of our inner world. The self we built in life becomes the world we wake up in after. Death is not an end. It is a doorway, and what lies beyond it is shaped by everything you brought with you. In these teachings, there's no judgmental tone. Cayce's words carry no fire and brimstone preaching, just a quiet depth, a gentle call to live in such a way that the soul, once free, will want to remember the life it lived. Life after death, Cayce said, is not the finish line. It is preparation. We don't die in the way we think. We transition, just like a student moving to the next grade. And the more we've understood in one life, the richer and deeper the lessons that await in the next. Once the soul finishes its reflection, not from the lens of ego, but through the clarity of love, it doesn't simply rest. It prepares. It prepares for another journey. Yes, Cayce spoke about reincarnation, but not as a punishment. He saw it as opportunity. Each life is a doorway. Each death, a sacred pause. And eternity? It doesn't punish, it teaches. Cayce described what he called the hall of decisions. Not a hall in the earthly sense, but a space of energy, of understanding. There, the soul, joined by spiritual guides, reviews what still remains unresolved. What wounds still need healing? What virtues have not yet blossomed? What love has not yet been received or given? Here, the soul chooses its next path, and the choice is never forced. The soul is not pushed. It is simply offered the truth, and it decides. But this choice can sometimes be difficult. Why was I born into poverty? Why did I lose a child? Why was I sick for most of my life? These are questions we all ask. From the human view, they seem cruel. But from the soul's perspective, according to Cayce, those questions change. They become, why did I choose this pain? Because only this would teach me compassion. Only this would awaken deep gratitude. Only this would open my eyes to the beauty of life. It's difficult to accept from a human perspective, but in the eyes of the soul, there are no tragedies. There is only experience, and even the most profound pain is not punishment. It's a doorway, a path that leads inward, to the soul's own rediscovery. Yet, not all souls are ready to return. Some feel they have caused too much harm. They are burdened with guilt. They feel unworthy. They fear that they've lost their way forever. And some cannot return, not yet, because they are stuck in attachment. They linger, not as ghosts in the traditional sense, but as unfinished echoes. They remain close to the people they loved, the places they cherished, the words they never said, the apologies they never gave. And this, Cayce explained, is the origin of many paranormal phenomena. Why do we sometimes feel a presence when no one is there? Why do the deceased appear in dreams? Why does the energy linger in a room where someone passed away? Because the soul hasn't fully moved on. Because they didn't get to say what mattered most. And deep within, they are still trying. That's why Edgar Cayce placed such importance on one simple truth. Let go while you can. Let go of resentment. Let go of guilt. Forgive. Speak love aloud, not tomorrow, but now, while there is still time. The living struggle with fear of losing. The dead, Cayce said, often struggle with fear of being forgotten. And both of these fears, when left unresolved, can hold souls back from their journeys. But then comes the most radiant part of all. Cayce revealed that some souls, having completed all of their earthly cycles, no longer return to the physical world. But they don't vanish. They don't dissolve into nothingness. They ascend into what he called the realms of light. These are not places of learning, but of being. Here, consciousness sheds its need for lessons and instead becomes pure energy, full of clarity and compassion. These souls don't return to reincarnate. They return to help. They become guides, protectors, unseen hands that gently support us in our darkest hours. Cayce said, these are the presences we sometimes feel when we are completely alone. When the world is silent and suddenly, out of nowhere, a sense of calm or warmth fills the space. As if someone is whispering through the silence. You are not alone. That is the map of the afterlife Cayce left us. Not a map of geography, but a map of the soul. A map built from experience, from memory, from emotion, from the hush between two thoughts. You are not a soul that has a body. You are a soul, temporarily wearing a body. And home? It's not up there. It's not a faraway realm. Home exists anywhere there is love. In a breath, in a tear, in a moment of stillness when you feel connected to something you cannot name. So, what comes next? Is there an end? Cayce wasn't a scholar. He wasn't a theologian. He was a simple man, a man who, through prayer and sleep, received answers that defied logic but resonated with truth. And his vision? It was nothing short of profound. He said that every soul walks the path. And along the way, every soul gets lost, again and again. But the goal is not perfection. It is remembrance. To remember who we really are. The soul doesn't begin from zero. It remembers, but it has simply forgotten. Life circumstances, fear, trauma, the noise of the world, all of these things act like dust, covering the light within us. But deep beneath it all, something sacred still resonates. That's why we feel déjà vu. Why a child says something that feels older than their age. Why a place we've never been can move us to tears. It is not our brain reacting. It is the soul remembering. And that is why Cayce saw reincarnation not as punishment, but as grace. Souls are not cast down. They are lifted, again and again, into new chances, new lives, new opportunities to choose love. Every time we awaken, through grief, through prayer, through the awe of beauty, we are touching that deeper truth. The one that has always been inside us. The soul, Cayce said, is like God's music. It plays, even when we forget how to listen. But what about the end? Is there a moment when the soul has reached all that it was meant to? Cayce answered simply, yes. But it's not an ending. It's a reunion. He spoke of the soul's return to the source. Not like a drop disappearing into the ocean, but like a ray of light becoming the sun once again, losing its form, but keeping its essence. And that essence is love. Not the kind we often mistake for validation or desire. Not fleeting emotion, but the kind of love that simply is. Love that surrounds, that accepts, that creates. Because when the soul becomes love, it no longer needs to learn. It no longer needs to return. It becomes part of the very force that shapes galaxies, stirs hearts, and breathes life into worlds. That's why Cayce believed the most important thing we can do on earth is to love, truly. Openly, patiently, to forgive, to pause and be grateful, to hold space for one another. Because each act of love, no matter how small, is not just a moral gesture. It is the act of a soul preparing for its return. So, what is this map of the afterlife? According to Edgar Cayce, it isn't about streets paved with gold or pits of fire. It isn't about punishment or reward. It's a journey through levels of consciousness. Not heaven and hell, but deeper and deeper understandings. Not fear of judgment, but a vision seen through love's eyes. Not escape from pain, but acceptance of its purpose. Not the promise of paradise, but the invitation to come home. A home that never vanished, only forgotten. And when we read Cayce's words, maybe we don't learn something new, maybe we remember something ancient. Something already inside us. A whisper, a name, a knowing of where we're going, and who we've always been. I am not afraid of death, Cayce said, because I have already heard that voice calling from the other side. And it wasn't loud, it wasn't a cry, it was a wisp,